Hey, good morning, everyone. Anyone got any sore heads after the after party? Feeling a bit hungover? Yeah, well, thanks for coming out. Um, who was singing Rammstein? I just heard that people were singing Rammstein at the karaoke. Who was that? I'm guessing the Rammstein person didn't make it in this morning. Right, so yeah, my talk today isn't very JavaScript focused, unfortunately. My focus is much more on kind of performance engineering. And I'm going to be talking about why fast matters. Why is performance important to businesses, to companies, but also to end users, and specifically end users in emerging economies or in regions in the world that don't necessarily have access to the quality of infrastructure that we do. The talk's kind of split in two halves. The first one is going to be a bit of background about different parts of the world and how they experience the internet, how they experience the web. And then we're going to move into more practical sort of looks at how we can start optimizing and making faster websites. So yeah, my name's Harry. I'm a performance engineer, consultant performance engineer from the north of England, which explains the weird accent, right? So apologies for that. But I help big companies write much faster websites, more scalable code, faster websites. Faster websites keep users happier, they make businesses more money. And I've been really fortunate to do this with some really nice companies in my career. I work for myself, but I've worked with some really, really nice companies. One company on this slide, the train line, they published a statistic a couple of years ago that said if they could reduce latency by just 0.3 seconds, customers would spend an extra £8.1 million every single year. Right? That's huge, huge numbers. £8.1 million. Now, I helped the train line on this body of work. I actually helped them implement this. The good news is it's really, really easy to make a website just 0.3 seconds faster. The second thing is, what I regret is what I should have said to the train line is, hey, look, if I can get you that 0.3 seconds, can I just keep the 0.1 mil? But I didn't think to do that, so they just paid me a normal day rate. But this is the kind of numbers we're dealing with. And making websites faster definitely translates to greater revenues. Another company, Netflix. Unfortunately, these aren't a client of mine, but Netflix saw a 43% decrease in bandwidth, or their bandwidth bill, simply by turning on gzip. The first question I've got is, why wasn't gzip turned on? This case study really ought to say, Netflix used to waste 43% of their money by not having gzip turned on. But the second thing I find interesting here is that most of Netflix's throughput couldn't be gzipped anyway, right? It's video. So purely their text-based assets, they managed to reduce their throughput, their overhead, by 43%. That's an enormous number. I hope whichever engineer turned gzip on got a nice pay rise afterwards, because imagine how much 43% would translate to at Netflix's scale. And finally, GQ, Lifestyle magazine, cut load times by a very, very impressive 80%, and in return, they saw an 80% increase in organic traffic. The key word there that I've missed out is the word organic. So this wasn't social, this wasn't paid search. This is purely people sort of Googling and finding them. And after that, the median time on site went up by nearly a third, 32%. That's absolutely incredible. This shows us that users will engage more with applications, with websites, if they run more quickly. Now, the reason I picked these three particular case studies were all grabbed from this website here. This website is an absolute goldmine of information. WPOstats.com is just full of different case studies and reports about how companies and organizations have made performance changes and it's improved their business. I always use this website when I'm trying to convince clients to spend more money on performance, right? Because they'll contact me and I can go to WPO Stats and I'll find a company just like my client and I will say, hey, did you know that your competitor increased revenue by 10% by focusing on performance? Pay me, right? So this site is really great for that kind of stuff. There's a reason why I picked these three particular case studies, though. The first one showed us that performance will make more money. It will make organizations more cash. The second one showed that it will save us money. I've worked with clients before where we've managed to reduce their data overheads by around 60%, right? Huge savings for companies. And the last one, we kind of talk a lot about cash, right? It's a very kind of capitalistic worldview. We talk about money all the time. But the third one I included because fast websites just make users happier. No one enjoys using a slow website. Nobody finds it relaxing to have to wait a few more seconds for a web page to load, right? It's stressful. In fact, interesting case study happened. When I talk about stressful, it is measurable. Like people who are forced to use slow websites in like experiments, they get more annoyed, they get more angry at the website, and they start blaming other things. So there was a case study where 2 different groups were given the same website, and one of the groups was given an artificially slowed down version of that website, and both groups were asked to talk about it. Hey, what did you think of that website? And the normal group, who got the normal speed, said, yeah, it was good, it was fine, like I managed to do things, it's okay. But the group who had the website slowed down artificially said, well, it felt kind of slow and clunky, but it looks out of date as well, and I don't like the design, and the navigation feels really hard to use. So they associated so many other bad things purely with the website being slow. However, I want to talk about something different in this talk. I don't want to talk just about money. I don't want to talk about finances and cash. I think there is a moral side to web performance. I think there is a side to web performance that leads to better access for people around the world, and it focuses way more on ethics. I want to share a few little stories with you. All of these stories I'm about to share happened to me last year. So I'm not talking about the internet 5 years ago, not even talking about the internet sort of 3 years ago. Literally a few months ago, these 3 things happened to me. So the first one, I was organizing an event with a friend of mine who lives in Leeds, the city I'm from, and he runs a really nice coffee shop, and I sent him an email. I was like, dude, we need to kind of sort things out. I sent him this email, and he never replied to me. And I was like, I really need a reply. It's an important email. So I went into his coffee shop in person. Do you know when someone sends you an email, then they send you a text saying, hey, I sent you an email. Then they send you a Slack message saying, I just sent you a text. I did that bit in real life. How annoying is that? I turned up in his coffee shop like, I sent you an email. And he said, look, I'm really sorry I didn't reply, but I was out in Thailand on holiday, and the data connection out there was so bad that I could see a push notification telling me I'd received an email, but it wasn't strong enough to actually open the email itself. Just because he happened to be in Thailand, the data wasn't strong enough to open an email. The next one, someone sent me an email asking me for some career advice. They were asking me about how to get into web development and where to kind of start looking for things. And I sent a really long response. I must have spent about 2 hours replying to this person, and they just never got back to me. And I was like, oh, that's kind of rude, but I got over it. 2 weeks later, they did reply, and the first thing they said was, hey, I'm really sorry for the delayed response. I'm just on a really bad connection. And I said, well, I'll forgive you if you tell me everything you mean by bad connection. And his reply was amazing. I'm currently at my parents' place in Rajasthan, which is northern India. Since my parents don't have a computer, they only consume internet through their smartphone. We rely on internet services by telco providers, which in our town are still 2G. Most of them claim to be 3G, but I've never actually seen that working. Right now, I've got my laptop connected via a Wi-Fi hotspot, and opening the basic HTML version of Gmail takes between 30 and 60 seconds. Every other sort of site, I tend to use mobile Chrome anyway because it makes data savings for me. So a few really interesting things here. When you go home, you've probably got a router in the corner of your room beaming out Wi-Fi, right? And if you're very lucky, that might be backed by a fiber network. Now this person doesn't have that. What they've got permanently in the corner of their room is a commodity sort of like €80 Android device that permanently beams out a 2G connection. You know when the internet goes down at the office and you have to tether your phone for an afternoon, and you're on 4G, and even on 4G you can tell just everything feels slower because you're trying to tether your phone. Imagine being tethered to 2G permanently, all the time. Absolutely crazy. And the other thing as well is, I've had to use the basic HTML version of Gmail maybe 10 times in my entire life, and every time it happens, it's the worst thing that ever happened to me. This guy has to use the basic HTML version of Gmail every time, and it still takes a minute to load. Now, the third story, this one's my favorite. Someone sent me a DM. It was a guy from Nepal, a Nepalese developer. I'm not called @Harry on Twitter, so I'm not sure who got the notification, but he sent me a DM just asking for some career advice, some like, where can I find these kind of examples of code? Now, in my Google Analytics, which I'll discuss again in a second, in my Google Analytics, I'd been warned that Nepal was a problem region for me. My website was slow in Nepal. So I said to this guy, hey, look, whilst I have your attention, is my website slow for you? And his reply nearly knocked me off my chair, because he said, no, I clicked through to your website and it loads within a minute. And that didn't feel slow. Imagine what a slow website feels like for this guy. It's going to be, what, 3 minutes, 5 minutes? So a couple of interesting things here is, my website's designed to be fast, right? I'm a performance engineer. I have to have a fast website. If you visit my website from, for example, Dublin, in Ireland, it'll be fully loaded within 1.5 seconds. The exact same website, the exact same CDN, the exact same code, the exact same infrastructure, probably the exact same browser. He probably uses Chrome. It took 45 times longer just because he happened to live in Nepal. This is like the geographic penalty that a lot of internet users have to pay. The second thing is, imagine what a non-optimized website feels like. Imagine what like a 5 meg Angular application would feel like to someone in this kind of region. There's an initiative called the Next Billion Users. Who's heard of this? The Next Billion Users. Okay, a handful of people. This is an initiative mainly spearheaded by people like Google. If you just Google Next Billion Users, you'll find it. But it's basically attempts and efforts to make the internet suitable and fast enough for the next billion internet users. Over the next 5 to 10 years, over 1 billion people are going to come online for the first time ever. There are still 1 billion people out there. Well, there's more than 1 billion out there, but over the next 5 to 10 years, 1 billion people are going to be arriving on the internet for the first time ever. This graphic is really quite remarkable. More people live inside that highlighted area than all of the outside of it combined. More people live under that white splodge than anywhere else outside of it combined. Most of our next billion users are coming from these parts of the world. Now, when you look at this map and realize that you've got India, China, Indonesia, Bangladesh underneath that highlighted area, you soon realize you've got very heavily, densely populated countries. But most of our next billion users are coming from these regions. I just want to quickly share some statistics about the state of the internet in these kind of this part of the world. Bangladesh, 3.5 meg is our average connection speed. Only 15% of Bangladeshis are online. 2.4% of the population have a dedicated broadband subscription. Only 2.4% of the population have what we would consider a permanent internet connection. But 83% of the population are on mobile. What this means is that 34 times more Bangladeshis are on a mobile connection than on a dedicated, like, sort of Wi-Fi connection. High latency, low bandwidth, permanently, 34 times more people. But it gets worse. In India, again, 3.5 meg average connection speeds. A quarter of Indians are online. 75% of people in India don't even have the internet yet. With 17.1 million broadband subscriptions, that's only 1.3% of India has what we would consider a permanent internet connection. However, with 1 billion, and that's not a typo, that's billion with a B, cellular subscriptions, 79% of the population do have access to mobile data. What that means is 58 times more people are on mobile than on broadband. It gets worse. Pakistan, 2.5 meg average connection, only 1% of the population have dedicated Wi-Fi. 67% of the population are on mobile. That's 70 times difference, right? 70 times more people on a high latency, low bandwidth connection. The most interesting one of the group is Indonesia. It's got the fastest connection speed, 4.5 meg average connection. A fifth of people are online. Only 1.1% of the population actually have broadband. However, there's a weird phenomenon happens here where 132% of the population have a cellular subscription. This means that people on average have more than one SIM card. Now, this may be explained by the fact that Southeast Asia is the fastest growing economy on the planet, and Indonesia is its fastest growing country. It's a very digitally engaged country. They tend to have kind of more than one SIM card. This represents 121 times more people online via a high latency, low bandwidth connection without access to what we would consider proper Wi-Fi. Averaging this region out, we'll find that 3.5 meg average speed, only a fifth of people in this region even have the internet. Only 1.5% of people here have a dedicated broadband subscription. 1.5% have what we would consider a dedicated internet line. Conversely, a staggering 90% have a cellular subscription. That's absolutely insane. The difference there is astounding. If we contrast that with ourselves, we've got 12 meg average speeds, pretty good. 50% of people are online, apparently. 11% or 12% have broadband. But here, this is the biggest number I've ever seen. 144% of you are on cellular. You've all got more than one SIM card. I don't want to know what you're hiding from your partners and why you've got two SIM cards. But in Ukraine, apparently 144% of us are on a cellular connection. That's a huge difference between the rest of the world, this next billion users. What this means is we're kind of building for a completely different kind of audience, right? The kind of people that are about to come online is very, very, very different than we perhaps realize. Also, it means things like when we talk about mobile first. When we talk about mobile first, we normally mean, oh, I write min-width media queries, and I start with Sketch in the smallest possible viewport size. What mobile first really, really needs to mean is developing over a 3G connection to start with, and then treating Wi-Fi, treating broadband as progressive enhancement, treating that as a bonus. Now, when I do work with clients, the first thing I'm asked, inevitably, is how fast should our website be? How fast is fast enough? And unfortunately, there is no real answer to that question. You can't just pick a number out of the air, because it depends what your website is doing. It depends where your website is operating. It depends on a lot of variables. You can do benchmarks. You can start getting a testing things over time. I worked with a client recently, and we decided that we will measure how fast the website is right now, and we make a promise that it never gets slower than that. So that's where we started. However, the easiest place to start is just be faster than your nearest competitor. Identify your closest competitor in your kind of industry, and just make sure you're faster than them. I found a really useful website last year called Dare Boost. And Dare Boost, just competitive benchmarking. Just drop 2 URLs in there. It will run the same tests against both of them, and it will just do a competitive analysis between you and a particular competitor. This is free. Dare Boost is a great tool. There is a paid option, but this tool is a great start if you're trying to convince your clients or your managers to focus on performance. If you've got a little more cash, there's an amazing, amazing tool called SpeedCurve. Anybody heard of SpeedCurve before? A couple of people. So I've got such a crush on SpeedCurve. I think it's beautiful. Here we can see that the New York Post and the Guardian are kind of fighting for the fastest kind of speed. But Huffington Post is failing, right? Failing pretty miserably. So the HuffPost here, we can see that they're doing nowhere near as well as the other competitors. So this is a great thing to set up initially to start your performance efforts. Now, talking about starting performance efforts, how do we get there? How do we actually start building faster websites? I've got a few tips for you, and these aren't like BuzzFeed kind of tips, 3 quick tips for a fast website. These tips are going to be quite fundamental. These things will require a change in how your organization operates. It'll mean kind of creating a performance culture. But luckily, the first tip, it's such a small tip that I've actually called it step 0, is just want a fast website, right? Just, hey, if you want a fast website, go out and build one. No one's going to stop you building a fast website. Now, people think I'm joking when I say this, but this step is critical, right? Don't underestimate the importance of this step right here. As soon as your company decides that performance is going to be a feature of your website, it's going to happen. You're going to build a fast website. The problem is that we get this effect of like mutual disownership, where nobody in the company thinks performance is their responsibility, or rather everybody thinks it's the developer's responsibility, right? That's what happens. As soon as product owners, project managers, as soon as the client understands that everybody needs to focus on building a fast website, you're going to have a fast website. It's as simple as that. But step 1, the real stuff, is understand the problem, but fully understand the problem. Really, really try and understand the problem. I was working with a client a couple of weeks ago in Tallinn, in Estonia, one of the most digitally capable countries in the world. Their office had like a dedicated line. It was pulling down hundreds of megabits a second. They were building websites for people in Venezuela, where the average connection speed is 1.9 meg. You can't really build effectively for a 1.9 meg audience if you've got a shiny MacBook Pro plugged into a hundreds of megabit line, right? It's just not going to happen. That disconnect is too severe. So properly understand the problem. One thing I kind of suggest to people is if you do try and build for the slowest connection first, imagine how fast your website would be on a fast connection. If you can make yourself fast over 3G, the website's going to turn up instantly over a dedicated line. Everything on top of that is for free. Facebook, a couple of years ago, implemented 2G Tuesdays. Now, Facebook engineers typically, are going to be in very well-connected cities. Most of them are out in San Francisco. They're going to be on really powerful machines. They're going to have like gigabit Ethernet lines probably. They're building on very, very fast infrastructure. They didn't really understand how difficult it was for people out in the real world to use the Facebook application. So they invented 2G Tuesdays, which was every single Tuesday, any member of staff inside the Facebook office was forced over a 2G connection to facebook.com. They soon understood that they'd not done a very good job of optimizing their website. The frustration was enormous. They were getting annoyed that this website takes so long to load. And they realized that, oh, okay, out there in the real world, I guess this is how people experience Facebook. Now, I personally, me as a person, I lack the skills to set this up. I couldn't set up a 2G Tuesdays, IP ring fencing, whatever, I couldn't do it. So what I do with my clients is use Charles Proxy. Who's used Charles Proxy before? Okay, it's free. Well, it's free in the same way that Sublime Text is free. Like, you just dismiss a dialogue every 30 minutes. But go and get it, right? Charles Proxy has got this amazing feature where you can start throttling specific domains. So you can say, well, whilst I'm developing today, I'm going to throttle localhost over a 3G connection. And you can start to force specific endpoints over specific connection speeds and begin to get an idea of performance. We set up a Venezuela kind of profile for my client who was building for Venezuelan customers. So they would turn on the Venezuela profile just so they could build their website on what it felt like in Venezuela. However, the bad news is it's not just connection speed anymore. Connection speed is kind of half of the battle. The rest of the battle is when something actually lands on the device. This is an iPhone 7. I've got an iPhone 7. Anyone else got an iPhone 7 or 8 or even 10? Yeah, show-offs. Who's got like a fairly new Android device, fairly high-powered Android device? Yeah? That's great, lucky us. However, it turns out that these aren't representative devices. If you want to build for a global audience, the current best advice from Google's engineering team is that the Moto G4 is the device to focus on. On a global scale, a Moto G4 is the most kind of common style of device. It's fairly recent, I think 2015, so it's not like an old phone. But when you look at global capabilities, this is the kind of device we should test with. And as soon as we compare this to an iPhone 7, we see vast differences. An iPhone 7 is immediately twice as fast as a Moto G4. Imagine everything running just half the speed just because you happen to have a Moto G4, right? It's the penalty you pay just by not happening to have an iPhone. When we look at more forensic tests, we find that an iPhone is actually 3 to 4 times faster in every metric than a Moto G4. So like I say, experiencing every website 3 to 4 times slower just because you happen to have a Moto G4 instead of a hundreds of euro iPhone is a tax, a penalty that users have to pay. Who's used this before? Chrome's kind of throttling. Good, great. Those who haven't, start using it. Begin throttling your CPU to a reasonable amount of slowdown in order to emulate a lower powered device. However, there is no replacement for real devices. You should absolutely focus on getting a real device in your device lab purely for performance testing. I have a Moto G4 in my bag right now. It cost me 130 euro, I think, and that is now my performance testing device. I don't use it for kind of responsive testing. I don't use it for any of that kind of stuff. Purely for testing performance, I use a Moto G4. Before that, though, I used to use a Nexus 5. This is me profiling my own site on a Nexus 5. Now, last year, I worked with a client who recently optimized their site for mobile. They made an M.dot website. Literally, it was only for mobile devices. However, 99% of their testing was done on big desktop machines in an office in central London. So the first thing I did was I thought, well, let's see how this website, this m.company.com website, let's see how that worked on a Nexus 5. And what they'd done is they'd recently rebuilt it to be a fully client-rendered React application, sending megabytes of JavaScript for the first page view, tens to hundreds of thousands of lines of code. Turns out that just parsing that amount of JavaScript, just evaluating that amount of JavaScript took 1.8 seconds. Just to churn over that many lines of code on a Nexus 5 took almost 2 seconds. Remember that to trainline, 0.3 seconds is worth £8 million. This is a lot of time we're throwing away, just sending way too big a payload to a low-powered device. So it's absolutely critical that we build up a realistic idea of conditions, realistic speeds, realistic device capabilities, realistic geographic locations, where are our customers coming from, and begin to understand exactly how things affect them. Step 2, know what's going on, right? Build up a good overview of everything that happens under the hood. As developers, we're often siloed into different teams, especially if you work on a large sort of e-commerce site maybe, or an application or a product. You might have different scrums, different teams contributing to different things. Most of my life is spent doing this. Well, what does this script do? Why have we got this? What's this for? Where is this even coming from? Who put this there? Right? Do we even need this thing? Who feels like this is a large part of their job? That's actually an optimistic number of hands. Lucky people usually see more hands than that. What happens to me all the time is I will do some work and I will build something and I'll commit it and I'll push it and I'll go home thinking I did something pretty good today. Then when I look at the actual live website, all of a sudden there are adverts there. And there's different tracking scripts that I've not heard of before, and all of a sudden a new A/B testing tool has arrived. I didn't install an A/B testing tool. Where's the A/B testing tool come from? Who did that? So one of the most important things is to find out where these things are coming from, find out what's going on. When I go and work with clients to do performance engineering work, one of my first jobs isn't to talk to the developers, it's to talk to the marketing team, find out what analytics packages they use, why do they use them, why do they like them, which A/B testing tools do they use, why do they like those, could we use a better one? So yeah, call meetings, work out what everything is, find out what you can do about it, be of assistance to different parts of the business. One of the biggest problems I find in businesses is tag managers. Now, can I get an honest show of hands? Who's not sure what a tag manager is? Yeah, a couple of people. Right, so I'm going to explain what a tag manager is because it's evil. It's so bad. So what it is, imagine this scenario. You're a developer and you're at work, and someone in marketing says, hey, look, can you just put this analytics package on the website? And you're like, yeah, sure, I'll do that after lunch. And you do it, and they're happy. Then the next day they say to you, hey, that analytics package was great. Can we now install this A/B testing tool so we can measure things? And you're like, well, I'm really busy. Can you just maybe put it on the backlog and I'll try and do it next week? I'm just really busy right now. So the marketing team get a bit annoyed. They think, well, it shouldn't take that long. I just want this thing installing. So what somebody did is they invented a tag manager. And what a tag manager is the developer just installed one bit of JavaScript, right? Google Tag Manager or Adobe Tag Manager maybe. And what that does is it links up to like an admin panel where that marketing department don't need to ask you to install a tracking script for them. They go and paste it in themselves, right? Just through like a CMS kind of UI, they can say, now I want to use this analytics package, and I want to use this A/B testing tool, and I want to measure number of clicks on this button. And what happens is they're writing production JavaScript. It's not production quality JavaScript, definitely not, but it goes straight to production because a tag manager is a simple way that allows a non-technical user to add JavaScript to a live website. It skips out the entire development process. You can't audit it, you can't refactor it, you can't tidy it up, you never even see it. The tag manager allows that marketing department to completely bypass the entire development phase. It's these tag managers that go crazy because what happens is marketing teams don't know about performance, or they don't know how to read waterfalls, they don't understand, it's not their job to understand, right? But the tag manager hides it all from them. So what I'm about to show you is an example of this. I had a client get in touch and they said, hey, look, our website's pretty slow and I think it's third parties that are causing the problems. And I was like, look, I've seen everything. Don't worry. I've seen it all. Nothing's going to scare me. What I found really scared me. The green is the website. The green is what the user turned up to see. The user wanted to see the website. This is what the developers thought they had built. Everything in green here is where the developer thought, well, that's the website working. I can go home now. However, towards the bottom of this green, a tag manager kicks in. Oh, get comfortable, it lasts for a while. This is absolutely insane. This is actually just disrespect, because if a user is on a capped data plan, for example, the organizers of JS Fest very kindly bought me a SIM card for whilst I'm in Ukraine. It's got 4 gig of data on it. I don't want you spending 3 of those gig on your tag manager, right? This is disrespect. This makes websites slower. This stuff's creepy as well. This is all the shit that tracks users and retargets them. This is nasty, nasty stuff. But the users pay the penalty for it. And the worst thing is developers never see it happening because this goes through like a tag manager. And this is why you think you've built a fast website, but your customers keep saying it's slow. It's imperative that we focus on things like this. So yes, we need to know our liabilities because third parties will cripple you. They will ruin your performance. This is a client of mine from back in the UK. It turns out that their optimization tool, their A/B testing tool that's meant to make them more money, contributed 98% of their runtime overhead. Apologies, that's probably quite small for people in the back. These slides are already online, so I'll share them. If you want to find out this information yourself, in DevTools you simply need to go to Performance, Bottom Up, and then Group by Domain. And this will literally tell you which third party is causing you the biggest performance cost. How ironic that an A/B testing tool designed to optimize the website was causing 98% of the runtime overhead. That very same client, the reason we worked together is because they were re-platforming their e-commerce site. It's a £1 billion business. We're talking big numbers here. We were re-platforming. We weren't redesigning, so there was no way of the customer knowing the site had changed, but we moved the entire stack from one build to another, and part of that effort was to make the website faster. So me and the CTO, who's become a really good friend of mine, we ripped out all of this nasty shit. We took all these A/B testing tools out, we got rid of all the analytics things that we didn't want, and the site got way faster. And in 2 weeks, all organic metrics were up. Revenue was up, number of items added to basket was up, the company was making more money, they were really, really happy. And that's because we pulled all this stuff out. This is an email the CTO sent me because after I'd left, what ended up happening is the marketing department said, "We can't believe how fast the new website is, it's perfect. Can we put the A/B testing tool back in there and make it measure it?" And we were like, no, the only reason it's fast is because we got rid of that. Unfortunately, the CTO and I, we lost this battle, and the marketing department put the A/B testing tool back in there. First paint went from 0.8 seconds back up to 2.1. We made the site almost 3 times slower by putting an A/B testing tool back in there. Then all of a sudden, the marketing department is saying, "Why has the website got slow?" It's like, you just did that. This is a battle that we lost, unfortunately. Third parties were really crippling our performance. So, identifying third parties is incredibly important. It's vital. If you're running a version of Chrome with experiments enabled, you should be able to find these things now. The version of Chrome you're currently running will look different to these screenshots. I'm doing like an expert's corner thing after this, so if you want to see how to set this up, come and find me. But you can turn on this thing called Network Request Group Support. And then you can also do this thing where if you right-click a heading in your waterfall chart, there's an option called Product, which gives you a new column which shows you which third-party different files are coming from. So on the BBC website, on the BBC website, see this brand new column? How nice is that? It tells you the names of all the third parties that these files are coming from. So I identified a problem here. There was this file that had a 35-second TCP connection time. If you can just make out on the right-hand side, there should be a red line immediately after that file. So that file was blocking the load event. This third-party file meant that the page took about 38 seconds for the load event to fire. So all I had to do was cross-reference it, and I found that it belongs to someone called the Rubicon project. So I just Googled Rubicon project, and sure enough, it's an advertising network. With this information, we can go to the advertising network and raise a bug, a support ticket, and say, look, this is a problem, it's causing us issues. But here's how you identify it. But third parties make us vulnerable. We've always called them assets, but really they're liabilities. A client of mine, Sky, they use an they use a tag manager. They use Adobe Tag Manager. An Adobe Tag Manager is a synchronous blocking script. That means that if that site goes down, if Adobe Tag Manager goes down, we go down for 1.3 minutes. Because this is a synchronous blocking script, if there's an outage at Adobe Tag Manager, we get a blank screen for 1.3 minutes before the browser eventually times out and moves on. This problem isn't unique to Adobe Tag Manager. If you just do link_rel equals stylesheet fonts.google API.whatever, if you just include Google Fonts as a synchronous style sheet and Google Fonts goes down, the exact same problem happens. 1.3 minutes, we show a user a blank screen. Now, if that's got you panicking and you're worried, it's easy to kind of test this locally. If you just map the third-party domain against that particular IP address, it will simulate a third-party outage. So this is a publicly available black hole server, which allows us to simulate third-party outages. Basically, don't prioritize your own metrics over your users' experiences. You should always collect data passively. You shouldn't ever have any sort of synchronous blocking scripts on your critical path. There's no point in measuring a website that the user can't even access. And finally, yes, measure everything. Measure the before and measure the after. It's imperative, it's vital that you measure before and after, because measuring before tells us if there's something wrong. How do you know if something's even wrong in the first place? And number two tells us, well, when have we fixed it? How have we done something good? When can we stop having to worry about this kind of stuff? Also, if you measure the before and after, it's a really good way of getting pay rises, because you can say to your manager, hey, the site used to take 5 seconds to load, now it takes 2 seconds. I did that, give me some money, right? So this is really valuable stuff as an individual. Measure the before and after because it shows your personal achievements. Now, I mentioned Google Analytics quite briefly at the beginning. Whose website's got Google Analytics installed? Okay, who hasn't logged into that Google Analytics account for about 9 months? Yeah, you're all lying. There's one honest guy over there. No one looks at Google Analytics, right? But it turns out that it's capturing passive performance information all the time for free. Now, the information isn't perfect. The data that comes out of Google Analytics isn't perfect. But it gives really great insights as to how your application performs all around the world. So one of the first things I do when I work with a client is I ask for access to their Google Analytics account. I worked with a client in Iceland last year, and they were developing a website which sold Northern Lights kind of tours, right? You go to Iceland, you want to see the Northern Lights, you would purchase a tour through their website. Their main demographics were US, Canada, UK, Germany, and Australia, right? So basically westernized countries. They had no idea what their slowest page was. They just wanted me to make their homepage faster. And I was like, well, your homepage feels kind of fast. And users never really see a homepage. They'll probably just search for something and land on the exact product page from a search engine, right? So let's not optimize the homepage. Let me look at your analytics, and we'll see what the actual problem is. And it turned out the homepage was already the fastest page on the website. If they'd have paid me money to make the fastest page faster, they wouldn't have got any benefit from that. What we actually found out, there was one specific, it was like a golfing tour, right? Apparently you can do a golfing tour of Iceland. I didn't think Iceland was big enough to have enough golf courses to do a tour of them, but apparently it is. This was by far the slowest page on the entire site, and that information allowed me to look into why that was. It turns out this particular page used a different third-party booking provider. That third-party booking provider was absolutely crippling performance. So using analytics gives you really good insights into how things are working and why that might be. In order to get to this stuff then, log into your analytics account, and you want to go to behavior in the left-hand side, and then site speed, and then page timings. This GIF is enormous, so it's about to make my Mac beach ball for a little while, so I'm just going to take a drink. This is how I found out that Nepal was a problem region for me. This isn't the Nepalese case study, but here you can see the average load time around the world for your website. And it's just fascinating. You click on each country and it will zoom into the exact city. So what's really weird is on my site at the moment, if you visit my site from Dublin, you get like 300-second load times. And I can't work out why, but it's pretty bad. This is fascinating insights. You could easily lose an hour of your day just looking through this stuff. And then after you've drilled down into different countries, you can cross-reference certain pages to certain regions. So maybe the home page is really fast in Ukraine, but the home page is the slowest page in Nepal. Why is that? And you could work out, oh, it's because the nearest CDN in Ukraine is actually right here in Kyiv, but maybe the nearest CDN in Nepal is in Mumbai, right? Maybe it's a CDN issue. Maybe that's what it is. This allows you to drill down into potential issues and find things out. An interesting thing I also discovered on my own website is that India is one of the slowest countries for reasons I outlined earlier. You know, their infrastructure isn't as good as it is generally in the West. But Brazil was a problem. Now, we talk about emerging economies. We normally talk about Southeast Asia. It turns out that by the definition of emerging economy, Brazil is an emerging market, right? Brazil is part of this next billion users. So I did some research into Brazil. It turns out that if you wanted to purchase 500 megabytes of data on a pay-as-you-go plan in Brazil, you'd have to work for 8.6 hours on minimum wage. That's how expensive data is in Brazil. 8.6 hours is basically a full working day. Imagine having to spend 1 day a month at work just to buy 500 megabytes of data. Absolutely crazy. I wanted to kind of compare this to something. I've got a travel SIM card that I use maybe sort of 10% of the time. And in a period of 1 year, I managed to use nearly 15 gig of data on this SIM card in 1 year. It turns out that if you're Brazilian and you want to pay for 15 gig of data, that's 28 days work at minimum wage. Imagine spending your entire February just working for your data plan for the year. How crazy is that? This means that when we're sending them all these nasty third-party scripts, these are eating into their money. Like, they could literally spend an hour working just to pay for your analytics. And it's absolutely irresponsible. And this is the kind of thing that I genuinely think developers need to be aware of. So I mentioned speed curve. The reason I use speed curve is because it allows me to get very good forensic information about how things work. And it's really important for measuring that before and that after. So analytics told me the before. The before situation is that Brazil is slow. So I set up some profiling in Brazil. I created a Brazil test agent. I created some fixes. I thought, well, maybe the problem is this, maybe the problem is something else. So in Brazil, I set up a new test agent. And sure enough, after I did my fixes, it turned out I needed some more aggressive edge caching on my CDN out in Sao Paulo. Things got better. You can immediately see here, you can tell your manager that, hey, look, on this day, I did something and things got better. That's very, very obvious evidence that you can take to the business, your manager, your client, and prove to them that you're doing good work. So yeah, that's speed curve. The reason I like speed curve so much, I'm not sponsored by speed curve, by the way, is that this is really good information to show to managers. It's non-technical information. It gets clients excited about performance. You can clearly see that something good happened towards the beginning of that graph. And sure, we're not perfect. Every now and again, we go over budget. But this is the kind of stuff that is business-facing. And I set this up with most of my clients so that managers and project managers and designers and marketing teams can all get excited about performance as well. So what we do is we set up budgets. Anybody set up performance budgets before in any of the work they've done? Not many of us. Good man. So yeah, basically, performance budgets are great. Managers don't really like the word budget, so we just call it monitoring. But you can set up automated alerts. This is my website. It's a fairly simple website. It's very 2018, actually. It's got the big image at the top. It's got bands of content. But it's a simple website. It's got a few analytics codes. It's got lots of images on there. It's got a few third parties for like a Twitter widget. So I've got some benchmarking set up for my website. And like I say, it's not very complex, so you'd expect to see good results. So yeah, if you visit my site from Ireland, this is Ireland, it's fully rendered it starts rendering within 1.2 seconds, or 1.3 seconds rather. Very fast, just because you happen to be in the West. It also is fully rendered in 1.3 seconds. This is the exact same website that took about a minute for somebody in Nepal. How can it take less than 1.3 seconds in Ireland, but also take nearly a minute in Nepal? It's just because that person happens to live somewhere different. This is Brazil. So in Brazil, the exact same code, the exact same infrastructure, the exact same CDN, the exact same browser. I go over budget 50% of the time. This isn't something that's necessarily my fault. This just goes to prove that some users just don't have the same access that we are used to. And that's continuous. The visually complete in Brazil is also the same kind of thing. So what I did is I set up some really, 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 really difficult tests. I created a custom profile called Very Bad Network. Very Bad Network was pretty bad. It was designed to replicate a very flaky 2G connection. High amount of packet loss, very high amount of latency, very low bandwidth, and things got really bad. This is really, really bad. This is what my site works like if you're in a very remote region. This is why people in Nepal take a minute to load my website. Because if you're on a flaky mobile connection, this is what things are like for you. Comparing Nepal, comparing the bad network, which is the top line, to all the bottom ones, you can see just how unreliable this kind of infrastructure is. Anyway, I'm kind of about to run out of time, so just to close, I'm just trying to wrap up a 96 slide presentation in 3 bullet points. First thing is just care. Just learn how to care about performance. And I don't mean you as individuals, because you're developers, and developers do care about performance. But I mean as a company, as a business. Try and get your clients and your colleagues and your managers excited as well. Understand customers. Look at that analytics package, right? If you've got access to Google Analytics, start using it. And measure absolutely everything. Make sure you've got a really good idea of what's going on, what's going wrong, and how you're fixing it. All the statistics, if you're interested, are available. All the data I gathered was real. Some fascinating insights if you go and look at some of these reports. But I just want to say thank you for listening. The slides are already online. You can grab them there, but thank you for your time. Are we doing questions?
Hello.
Hey.
Thank you very much for your interesting speech. For me, it was very useful and a bit shamey for me. But most of us use some frameworks to develop. Do you have any advice what framework to pick, what is built with speed up caring and so on?
So I guess I wouldn't say there's a particularly, in my opinion, I wouldn't worry too much about which framework is built for speed, because all of them could be misimplemented or implemented well. Things like Preact obviously have a tiny footprint. Vue's got a slightly smaller footprint than React, I guess. But the key advice here is don't load your entire bundle, don't load your entire application in like a 1-2 megabyte package just for first render. So try and do first render on the server, hydrate from there. Don't send like 5 megabytes of data over the wire just for the home page. So make really good use of code splitting and tree shaking. So whatever framework you are using, it's all about kind of payload size. Google's current advice is make sure you're not sending more than 170 kilobytes of JavaScript for first render, because that's a good benchmark to hit. 170 kilobytes of unminified, uncompressed JavaScript. So after gzip, it'll be even less than that. So the particular framework you choose might have some effect, but I've seen people implement React really well, but also implement React really badly. So it depends on the implementation, I guess.
Thank you.
Cool. If anyone's interested in the kind of frameworks thing, there's a really great article which I will tweet the article at the conference organizers. So if you want to check that out, it's all about sort of real-world JavaScript performance when using frameworks.
Any questions?
Over here. You're going to get a lot of exercise.
Thank you by your speech. Did you open your site on Google Analytics yesterday?
No, why?
Because yesterday I opened your site.
All right.
And I thought maybe after your conference you always open Google Analytics and always looking how much new people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't check. Maybe I'll check that this morning. See lots of visits from Kyiv.
Thanks for your talk. Do you have some advice how we can continuously measure performance and set up some checks to automatically detect performance degrading and so on?
Definitely. So there are 3 options you could use. I'll start with the cheapest ones. There's an application or a tool called sitespeed.io, and that can integrate into your CI process. So with sitespeed.io, you could build that into your continuous integration, send alerts and send sort of like warnings about degradations. Another thing that I've done before with a company I used to work at, we had a private instance of web page test installed, and every time we ran a release, we'd run a web page test over it, and it would automatically print that out for us. And every stand-up the next day, we would make sure we had a printout of web page test. Because that's the key thing, right? All this stuff you're measuring has to count. So in your stand-ups, you should make reference to your analytics packages or whatever. And then if you're happy to spend a bit of money, things like Speed Curve, New Relic, etc., they can send alerts if things degrade. But the problem is that's usually on the live website after the problem's already happened. So for local stuff and CI, I'd recommend looking at sitespeed.io. Cool.
And the last question.
Thank you for your speech. How do you convince your client or boss to perform on a performance budget?
Okay. So how do I convince them to actually start caring and focusing on performance? Or is that the question, or is it more specific?
How do you convince them you should achieve a specific performance budget?
Cool. So how do I convince a client to achieve a specific performance budget? Well, normally I'm quite lucky that if I'm working with a client, they're already going to listen to me. So if I was working in a company where it was just me, I wanted to improve performance, first thing is never tell a non-technical person anything technical. Never tell them about, oh yeah, DNS on our network is like really slow. Tell them something like, slight infrastructure problems mean that customers have to wait an extra half second before they see our website. And Google studies have shown that for every half a second of slowdown, blah, 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 blah.
Give them something measurable.
Well, give them something measurable. Also make sure that you always start with the problem. So don't say things like, I want to make the website faster, because your manager will think, well, I want you to build features, so that's what you're going to do. Start with the problem. Hey, look, I've identified a problem, and it means that customers are having to wait longer to see the website. Then people start panicking, like, oh, right, really? And then go to wpostats.com, it's in the slides, then find a case study that is similar to what kind of point you want to make, and say to your manager, hey, look, a similar problem happened for this company, they fixed it, and they made an extra £8 million a year. That's how you get buy-in for this kind of stuff. Always start with the problem, never talk technical to someone who's non-technical, and then make sure you keep feeding back to them. If you make something faster, make sure they know about it, make sure that, hey look, and be grateful. This is really important. If your manager or your client allows you to focus on performance, be grateful. In emails, say things like, hey, I'm really happy that we were allowed to focus on performance that last sprint. It's allowed us to make really good change. Me and the team are very appreciative. And in that last sprint, we achieved this, this, and this, which should mean X, Y, and Z in future. Because it's good to be grateful. So those are the kind of things I would focus on.
Thanks.
Thank you, Harry.
Cool, yeah. I think I'm doing like the experts thing in a second, so I'll see you up there. Thank you.